spice expands consciousness.
Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Greer, and I'm joined today with Dr. Ted Loder, and we're going to bring you an update on the work of the OrionProject.org and our search for energy solutions that would definitively get the planet on the path of sustainability and abundance. So welcome, Dr. Loder.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Yeah, just in brief, I want to just thank everyone who supported the Orion Project. Those of you who are new to the World Puja Network show, we started this project almost 3 years ago, in March, and our initial goal was to raise the funds to build a laboratory here near the University of Virginia where we could gather together some of the scientists that we've identified up to that point. At this point, we have many more really excellent scientists, and some of whom have actually worked in government programs on these sort of free energy, quote-unquote, or unusual electromagnetic systems. And we have a new proposal to have a research and development center developed where we could do that. One of the things that didn't happen right away was, of course, have enough funds to build a facility. So we have provided a number of grants to people, some of whom are still doing some experimentation. But the idea and the vision behind the Orion Project has been to do the synergy, the networking, and bring all these people together to develop the sciences under one roof. And the reason for that is that many people who try to do this on their own have hit a lot of technical barriers to being able to do it. And they really need the help of material science people, or they need the help of a very specialized area of physics or electromagnetics or mechanical engineering or any number of areas. And so we really feel that the best way to get to the objective of a new technology that would run your house or your car without any outside input, and that is what is called over unity, meaning that you're pulling energy out of the 0-point energy field of the space around us, or some other type of phenomenon that would enable you to get off of the grid and off of the coal-fired power systems and what have you. There has to be this kind of teamwork, and so that's still our objective. So thanks to the people who've done this support, we've done a lot to identify the people around the world who have potential, who could be brought under one roof, and we're still looking to get the majority of this funding in place. So that's what we haven't achieved yet, is to fulfill at this point, it's a $5.7 million new proposal that we put together, which is most big industrialists who hear that think that's a very small amount, but it's more than we have on hand, and so we're still looking to raise those funds because we think it's very important to give these types of technologies a chance. You know, our government is putting hundreds of billions of dollars into things like clean coal and other, frankly, boondoggles that aren't going to go anywhere to get us off of the world-destroying, climate-changing fossil fuel system. And what we're wanting to propose is a truly transformational energy direction, something that is out of the box, as it were, from the conventional wisdom. And we know this has been done. If you go to the OrionProject.org, you'll see that there's a long history going back about 100 years of people who have done innovative things to develop electromagnetic systems. For example, turning water, regular water, into a fuel. But that's through an electromagnetic process of very high voltage pulsed systems that cause water, H2O, to break down into gas and to be burned. We know those systems have worked. We've interviewed and have met with people who built systems like that. People wonder why they haven't gotten out to the world, and ultimately it's because many of them end up with a national security order on them, or they get some kind of threats and intimidation. The reason, as head of the Disclosure Project, I'm doing this and have been interested in doing this, is that half of the problem, or part of the problem, is the technological issue. A big part of the problem is the strategic issue, and that is how to get this out to the world quickly, because there are people who don't want that to happen, because it's a serious game changer in technology. And so looking forward here in 2011, what our real objective is to either identify someone who has already built such a system that understands that they need to join with a strategic team to move it out so it doesn't just disappear into one of these corporate dustbins, and will cooperate with a full evaluation and testing. So that's one of our objectives. The other is, of course, to raise the funds to have this facility built and bring these scientists in where we can do this, because we're certain at this point that within a couple of years, and probably less than that, probably within 6 to 18 months, we would have some serious breakthroughs in these technologies, because we have developed an enormous collection of intelligence and information on how these sort of systems have worked, the kinds of high voltage systems that result in a generator putting out more energy than you have to put into it. And so it could be a freestanding source of what people call quote unquote free energy. And a lot of people would dismiss this as an urban myth, but the scientific fact is that these systems have been developed over the last 100 years. They keep, however, ending up in the Black Pit of Calcutta. If you doubt that, go to the website, the OrionProject.org, and look at the American Federation of Scientists report that recently was released, I think this past fall, Ted, I'm not sure, that stated that even some of the solar systems in 1971 were confiscated and had the patents on them seized by the national security provisions, abusing the National Security Act. And so we know for a fact that there are at least 4,000 or 5,000 or more patents that have been seized this way. And it is an abuse of state power. Certainly, I seriously doubt anyone in Congress or the President is in favor of seizing something that would solve the global warming and energy crisis from an inventor. But this is happening by these bureaucrats who are really not answering to we the people, but they're answering to some other big industrial interest.
Yeah, just to expand on that very briefly, the number from that article that's actually listed and available on the OrionProject.org website by a man on this. Anyway, the article states there are over 5,135 inventions that were under secrecy orders by the end of fiscal year 2010. And just let me read just one sentence from here to give you some sense of things. Under the Inventions Secrecy Act of 1951, patent applications on new inventions can be subject to secrecy orders restricting their publication if government agencies believe disclosure would be detrimental to the national security. That's an interpretation by an agency, and it's been very widely interpreted, put it that way.
So, yeah, that's correct. So anyone at the CIA or NSA who would surface and say, look, that technology, in our opinion, would be of significance to the national security or detrimental, they just slap an order on it, and the inventor has no recourse. This is what people have to understand. I personally know inventors where this has happened. And, in fact, Dr. Loder, you can tell them the story of what you saw when you went out to look at the Stan Meyer equipment, that there was a type of fluid magnetic toroidal generator.
A generator in which Stan Meyer had invented, if you will, and actually had tried to get a patent on it. But it was a device in which a magnetic gas was circulated in a circle around a closed pipe, and coils around it, as magnetic gas passed by, created electrical currents in those coils. And it didn't take much to move the gas, and the power coming out of it was significant, even at the prototype level. But that never saw the light of day in terms of being developed further, because a secrecy order was put on it.
Yeah, and I think that secrecy order, if I remember right, dated back to the 1980s, I believe 84 or something.
Yeah, I can't remember the date, but it's around then, yes.
Yeah, and there was a scientist that we're working with who actually worked with Meyer and knew this for a fact. And so I think that what people have to understand is that how do you stand up to that kind of statism, that kind of state power? You've got to have a coalition of people who will stand up to that kind of power and say no. Because what happens is that the small company or inventor out there that's doing this is not going to say no to someone when they come through the door and they flash a badge and they say, look, this belongs to is now property of the United States government. If you speak of this, you're going to go to jail, and we're going to fine you, and your life is over. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a very mainstream group, this American Federation of Scientists, who put up this report on the abuse of the National Security Act in this way. And in fact, at one point, they even say, in what way could there be a threat to the national security that there'd be a more efficient solar panel that was suppressed in 1971? This has come to light. It's 1971, and this is almost 40 years ago now. So I think that the public have to understand that the strategic issues have trumped the technical ones, that there have been technological breakthroughs that would get us off of oil and gas and coal. And it's outrageous. And, as Brian, my friend, astronaut Brian O'Leary often says, the truth will piss you off. It'll set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. I think that, people get very upset about this. But I said, but there is something we can do about it. We can come together. We can learn about these things, and we can put these scientists who have worked on these sort of systems and know how they work in one place, fund it properly with proper electromagnetic equipment, proper lathes and fabricating equipment, proper project management and security, and come out with one of these things. And absolutely, as head of the project, I would say no if someone presented me with one of these things. I'd say, I do not recognize your authority. I recognize the authority of the people, the President of the United States, and the Congress, and I know those folks, and those folks are not in favor of suppressing this stuff, so go jump on a lake. So in other words, there's this parallel bureaucratic government which asserts its power in defiance of and actually behind the backs of the people, and this is not legal. So just as with the Disclosure Project, a lot of people don't understand the legal underpinnings of this, and I think this is what we want to talk about for just a moment. It isn't like, and I want to distinguish this from something like WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is actually people hacking in and taking files that are properly classified on, diplomatic cables and things like that. That's a very different thing than what we're talking about. We're talking about standing up to something we can prove to be an illegal, secret, parallel government. I want to repeat that, an illegal, secret, parallel government. These are people who, even if the president is called in and wants to be told about this stuff, basically will say no such project exists or go jump on a lake. For example, when President Carter wanted to find out about UFOs, he called in the outgoing CIA director, George Bush Sr., George Herbert Walker Bush, and was told, I won't tell you. Flat out. Go get it from the Congressional Research Service if you think they know anything. And this to an incoming president. Now, these are the kinds of things that happen. So there are secrets that are kept, that are managed in a way that is outside the Constitution and the rule of law. Therefore, by definition, those are rogue programs. Very different than a cable that goes from Hillary Clinton to the Prime Minister of Great Britain or something, if you see what I'm saying. We're talking about operations that have developed over since the post-World War II period, that have taken on a life of their own and have arrogated to themselves the right to take money and do certain things. No less a figure than Rumsfeld around 9/11. Donald Rumsfeld stated on the record, and it's in the media, that there's $2 or $3 trillion that were missing out of the Department of Defense budget over the last few decades. $1 trillion. Where did that money go? So this is what we're talking about. It is forget about grand theft or even the Madoff scandal. This is trillions now, not billions. And it has gone into operations which have been run illegally and which have deliberately defied congressional committees and presidents and blocked them from knowing. Now, there aren't many people who can prove that. I can, because I'm the guy who's actually sat down with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and with the CIA director and people like this and seen that they are, in fact, out of the loop. And so we have concluded that all of this information has been held secret through an illegal application of the Secrecy Act. There are legal applications. There are reasons for confidentiality. There's reasons for secrets. But these particular programs have been managed illegally. And therefore, if you're part of an illegal operation, you can't cite the law to protect yourself. And this is in a letter that is in my first book, Extraterrestrial Contact, The Evidence and Implications, which is at disclosureproject.org. And in this letter that went to the head of every agency in the United States government and every cabinet-level person, it states that unless otherwise directed, we're going to move to bring this information out to the public because we have concluded that these operations and programs are being run outside the rule of law and are therefore illegal. No one from any department ever said to us otherwise. And that's why a lot of people have asked me, what kind of blowback did you get from having 110 top secret people come forward with the Disclosure Project? I said, not at all. Not a single one of them was ever called or approached. And the reason for it is that we did it in unison, in unity, massively. Nearly 1 billion people worldwide saw that on the Internet, and that's what we want to do with an energy device that's a free energy device that will run your house or run your car without oil and gas and coal. You can't sit around on this thing. Once you have it, you got to move it out quickly. So there are two pathways to this as we see it at this point at the OrionProject.org, and I want to be very clear on this. One is we identify someone who actually has an operational system, somebody like a Stan Meyer, who's passed away now, and his collection, by the way, we were trying to acquire it, but another group actually did get that collection, and we wish them luck. I don't know what they're doing with it because we don't know, we're not privy to what they're doing, but the fact is there are people out there every year who stumble across this phenomenon and come up with devices that work. We need to be sure that if they do, they find their way to us so that we can launch it out there. Because the mistakes that are made usually is that people who have these devices end up having people buy them out, and those people then get threatened and they put on a shelf. One of the problems is that I know for a fact that, and in fact I've talked to Dr. Tom Bearden about this, he knows people personally as well who had developed such systems and they didn't have a pot to pee in. And the next time you see them, they're driving a Lamborghini and have Armani suits. And basically someone came along and said, here's $50 million, but we now own this technology, and then they put it on a black shelf. So the black shelving of the technology is another trick that's used. Now, to the inventor, it's great because they get rich. For the world, it's a disaster. So my position has always been, if somebody offered me $100 billion for such a device, I would say no thank you, because I'm certain that whoever would be offering such a sum of money would be probably out-representing the oil industry or this global cartel of people who are defending something much larger. Now, I'm going to give you the number of what that much larger is. It's $600 trillion. $600 trillion or so is what the commodities and derivatives and futures markets are worth on what's traded in the ground, what they're trading on the ground, which is the oil and gas and coal that's sitting in the ground. It's not even from the selling of them. It's what Goldman Sachs makes from all the derivatives. It's what it's all of that. It's huge financial, what we call churning. In fact, even the carbon. I was reading an article last night in a policy magazine about how Goldman Sachs had 100 lobbyists trying to get the cap and trade thing passed through Congress because it was going to set up a $2 trillion derivatives market that they would be trading carbon credits on.
It's all funny money, and it really doesn't do anything to advance things.
No, of course not. It doesn't. These are people who don't manifest or create a single thing. They don't make anything. They're not making a car. They're not making anything. They're making trillions of dollars. But the way they make it is the public doesn't understand this. I know someone who is actually president of a hedge fund, and he's explained this to me, is they make it through computerized programming, trading, and getting in line before someone else. And it's this is why these people make billions of dollars a year, but they're not creating any true wealth for the world or for the nation, never mind solving the problems. And that's what's happening. And so you have people who are doing this with trillions and trillions of dollars worth of assets. I mean, if the carbon trading offsets alone were in the $2 trillion market, imagine what all the commodities that are in the ground are worth that they're trading. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the money is. It's much more than even the Saudis selling oil. That's small potatoes. So basically, when you're taking on these kind of interests, you have to think differently. You can't think with in a normal business way. And this is the mistake that almost every inventor has made. They think they're just going to roll out another iPhone, like Steve Jobs comes up with another gadget. No, because a gadget like that isn't threatening the fundamentals of a $600 trillion trading system based on funny money nonsense that these masters of the universe are getting filthy rich on. So this, unfortunately, this rot and corruption and Wall Street nonsense is what it really calls the shots in Washington. There's no question about it. But in order to bring out one of these energy devices, you therefore have to have a strategic team of leaders, and that's what we've put together to be the launch vehicle for one of these technologies that will, as I used to say, just say no. No to the national security seizure, no to the big money people who want to suppress it, no. We're going to get it out to the people who need it and to the world that needs it to save the Earth's environment, to give people free energy, and to transform the world into a sustainable planet. This is what should have happened with Tesla's genius and breakthroughs 100 years ago, Ted, right?
And others from his a little later, Moray and his devices, technology.
T. Henry Moray, right.
Yep. And a number of scientists and inventors in developed devices that utilize this, quote, free energy in some form or another. And it's sort of all a matter of history now, and yet we're still using fossil fuels and burning things and using technology from the late 1800s, basically by producing steam and running turbines and running generators.
Right. I point out that this is what a nuclear power plant is, a big steam turbine. That's all it is. We're splitting the atom to create heat, to create steam, to turn a turbine, like the 1800s. The only difference is that instead of burning coke or coal, you're burning, getting the heat from splitting the atom, and then you've got thousands, tens of thousands of years of deadly radioactive muck that you've got to figure out what you're going to do with. So, which is its own boondoggle. So I think that here we have a situation where the real solutions keep getting suppressed, bought out. People actually have been killed. We know this for a fact. So what we have to do is take the strategy and the network that we've built that successfully did disclosure and apply that to these energy systems. Because if we don't, the next inventor that comes along, it will make the same mistake that was made when Nikola Tesla had J.P. Morgan say to him, "You can't do this because if I can't put a meter on it, I don't want it out to the world." So this is the problem. And it's a fundamental spiritual problem, in my view, of courage to stand up to these bullies that are hell-bent on destroying the world and maintaining this sort of centralized power that they have over the planet. And unfortunately, it's reached the point where the damage they're doing is so great that a few years ago I coined a term, planeticide, the ability to actually deliberately kill an entire planet. And this is what we see happening. The oceans are dying, the polar ice caps are melting, thousands of species of biological plants and animals are vanishing. In fact, the National Geographic has called it the Great Extinction. But instead of the dinosaur era, when an asteroid hit, it's all man-made. And this is something that's totally of our doing, and that we can fix. And we have been called on by nature, and it's come through the minds of people for 100 years, the solutions, but they keep running into this lead wall. And that's what we want to find a way around. So there's two ways to do it, my friends. One is that somebody out there who actually has one of these things operational cooperates with its evaluation, its replicability. Science has to be able to be independently reproduced and tested and can be proven. Or we put together this team of folks that we've identified. And I have to say we have some breaking news on this. There's a very senior scientist, what the Secretary of Navy termed one of the 14 national treasures in the Department of Defense system, who has been working with us. And this man is coming up on retirement, and he wants to work with us all the time. He also has a whole group of people, of half a dozen of the most brilliant physicists and engineers and electromagnetic scientists that he wants to bring into this operation. This is a man that I've known for nearly 20 years and is of impeccable integrity and incredibly knowledgeable. And we need to have that man and the people that he's working with in a properly equipped facility, and we need to raise about $5.7 million to do it.
Yeah, I'd like to address that when you have a break there, Steve.
Yeah.
Right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have analyzed what would be needed to put together a group and fund them for a period of time that we feel would be enough to start the process and develop at least several different technologies. Steve has mentioned we figure a budget about $5.7 million would allow us to do this. And that includes project management, includes a team of 6 to 8 science engineering people, and coupled with consultants in specific areas where we might need. So we get a large enough group together so there's synergy and overlap and support from the different disciplines needed to address many of these problems and the issues. It includes such things as the usual travel, facility rental, and the building of a facility that has the research equipment, the electronic analyzers, the fabrication equipment, to be able to do almost everything in-house in terms of the analysis and testing. And to put that whole thing together over a 2-year period, it looks like about $5.7 million is very doable to make that happen. Much less than that, you can't get the number of personnel needed for the synergy to occur. Yeah. 1 or 2 scientists is just not enough because no one scientist has the full range of background necessary to do some of this development and engineering. And
right.
People need a support staff of people who know, who are engineers. So we have scientists who can conceptualize, engineers who can create the motor, the generator, the device, and perhaps build it in a machine shop to make it all happen. And that's why we need that amount. To some people, it sounds like a lot of money. It's the average Joe, $507 million. To anybody in the industry doing research and development, it's really a small amount. But it's
a tiny amount, yeah.
But it's very focused. It's not a broad thing. We have, over the past 3 years plus many years, identified specific people, as Dr. Greer has mentioned, and specific areas that are what we've termed the low-hanging fruit, or the areas of energy technology that are probably the most promising on a short 1 to 2 year time scale. And these include 4 different areas. There are other areas, but these are areas that we see as very, very high potential, and including this water to fuel hydroxy gas system. There's a number of people working on this. We know people working in the theory of it. electromagnetic generators, another area. Permanent magnet, those are solid-state devices. Permanent magnet or pulse motor generators are rotating magnetic generators. And finally, devices that use what is sometimes called countergravity, electrogravitic, devices that use those phenomena of anti-gravity to produce generators in addition to the anti-gravity thing. So those are four areas that we see are very highly likely because people have already been successful in these areas to a certain extent.
Well,
anyway,
people have been very successful. They just haven't been able to get it out to the public. And one of the problems is that people have to understand that if a tree falls in the woods and the 7 billion people on Earth don't hear about it, then it effectively, did it really exist? Well, yeah, it did, but in sort of a very small circle of people, sort of a fringe element. Mm-hmm. Our purpose in this would be to mainstream this and get this in front of everyone from the president to senior people in science to people in the entertainment industry like Oprah. And the reason for it is that we know that everyone wants to see this solution. I mean, it's not as if everyone with power and money in the world are wanting to keep this stuff secret. It's a relatively small number of people who benefit from the secrecy, the illegal secrecy, I should point out. And therefore, we have a lot of allies, but they want to see something operational. Now, it's a bit of a chicken-egg thing because a lot of people, before they get involved, want to see something already built. But in order to get something built, you need the funding to be able to put these people who've worked previously on these systems, some of them in classified projects, together and build them. So it is a chicken-egg problem. Unless some inventor that's listening out there walks through the door with a fully operational system who is sane and reasonable enough to cooperate with the strategic plan to get it out to the public, which is a very, very rigorous process because we have a team of wonderful volunteers. Up to this date, I have to point out that 100% of the funds that people have contributed to the OrionProject.org have gone to actually help study this issue and to the work. No one has received a salary. In other words, Dr. Loder and Dr. Bravo and myself, we have other engineers who are volunteers. None of them are paid anything for their time, nothing, zero. But they're out-of-pocket expenses, obviously. But if what we want to be able to do is to say that these folks are standing ready. They're really on call 24/7. If there is some system that exists already that needs to be properly evaluated, tested, and then reproduced, because if you can't reproduce it, you can't say it's a science. If somebody has something operational and another scientific team can't reproduce that effect, it isn't science, my friends. It's somebody is pulling wool over your eyes. Yeah, or whatever, because real science is reproducible. And that's the sine qua non of science. So we have people to do that, and we're actively searching all the time. In fact, before this phone call, this interview started, Dr. Loder and I were having a phone call conversation about some of the things that are kind of out there percolating that may be existing systems that are in the pipeline. But I think that the most secure way to do this is to put very well-qualified, experienced people under one roof where they can do this with the right equipment. And I have to emphasize, this is a very expensive proposition because the equipment has to be able to handle tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of volts of electricity, but at very low amperages. Because, you're dealing with, when you get into these sort of systems, if you look at what Stan Meyer, for example, was doing, turning water into a fuel using very little electricity, so it was, quote, over unity, meaning that it released more energy than you had to put into it from the electricity. That's because of the unique voltages and pulsed pattern of resonant frequencies of the electrodes that he was using. That's why that system worked. And the equipment and the circuitry and even the devices you need to be able to measure your progress are all highly specialized and, frankly, would have to, in some cases, be custom made because we deal in a low voltage world. I mean, if you look at your electrical appliances, it says 110 volts on it, which is your household outlet. High voltage in your house would be 220 for your washing, your dryer for your clothes. But that's very low voltage, but it's a lot of amperage, a lot of current. But what we're talking about is very high voltage systems and specific resonant frequencies that are extremely low amperages. And so you're using very little power, but the voltages are high. And so you're using very little power, but it's tapping into, and this is the overarching theory I want everyone to visualize, whether you're doing it in water or an electromagnetic generator or permanent magnets. What these things are really doing is that they're tapping into this field of energy that's in the fabric of space-time. And some have called this zero-point energy. Some have called it the quantum vacuum. Some have called it, I don't care what you call it, but there's a huge potential amount of energy that's in the space all around us. This has been proven since the 1800s. Now, tapping into it requires very specialized engineering and physics, and that's what we're talking about doing at this laboratory. And then you can convert a car to run on water, you can make something fly and lift, you can have what looks like a generator that runs your house, but it's off the grid, and it's pulling energy out of the space around it. That's where we want to go with this. But there's a lot of R&D, and you know the budget we have is relatively small. And in fact, some people said, "Oh, well, it's too small." I said, "Well, we are not starting from scratch. We have one of the other exciting things to announce is that we have acquired, and Ted has gone through this, a whole series of files that are on a disk that are thousands of pages, thousands of files of documents." From an intelligence source that was working with someone that both Ted and I have visited this man's lab. And this particular man, who we don't want to name, was being recruited by the intelligence community, and his handler said, "Look, you know, as a show of good faith, I'll let you copy all these files I have on all these secret devices." And so he did, and now we have them. I mean, it's a very long story made short, but that's what it is, and we have all this on a CD now.
Mm-hmm. That's a good summary of things because, as I think it's very important to note, we have not only a lot of background information, but we also have a lot of people who, as Dr. Greer has said, have worked in these areas for years, either within the Defense Department or other industries. And they want to work on this stuff now with us and bring some of this out. So we aren't starting from the bottom rung of the ladder. We're partway up the ladder already. And furthermore, we know that some of these things have been developed and made functional in the past. And knowing something is possible in some cases is half the battle toward getting there. Knowing that it can be done.
Absolutely. It's one of these things that's, if you understand the principles and you have people experienced in that art, which is who we're talking about, the people who have agreed and want to work with us on this, then you're not talking about starting from scratch because there's 100 years of work that's already been done. It's a much shorter pathway. And that is exactly what needs to happen at the same time that you're putting the strategic team together, which we've done, to get this out to the world because, this year I've been invited to some events that are at the Sundance Film Festival. Well, if I had an operational device, I'd be able to say, look, here it is. And, I just walk right up to Oprah or whoever. So I think that what we want to be able to do is get to the point where we can put this in the network that we've built and say, look, this is not only theoretical, it is operational. So either we have to find someone who has one that hasn't already been snarfed up by the national security state abuse of power, or we have to do it ourselves, and then when the national security state comes a-calling, they know not to come to calling on me because I've already gone through this. I mean, I was approached, to give people a short course in the history of the last 20 years, in 1992, the head of Army Intelligence offered me $2 billion to shut up, and I wouldn't take it. And then he went to my wife and all kinds of flattery and chicanery, trying to convince her that I should fold what I was doing and merge with some shadowy operation that he was working on. And I finally said, I'm not going to do it. And this is 18, 19 years ago now. And basically, within 30 days of that, my name was mud, and there's been nonstop defamation of character and attacks on me all over the Internet. But the point is, that is the kind of things they will try. And the average person is not going to say no to a $2 billion buyout offer.
In fact, it takes a lot less than that.
Okay, yeah, we found that for some people it takes a few $100,000. Depends on the person. He knew that, but I said no, I'm not interested. So in other words, it's like when you go to an art show and it says not for sale on it. I'm not for sale. The knowledge that needs to come out to save the world from this crazy trajectory we're on isn't for sale to some devil who happens to have control of the printing presses, or is running drug money, or whatever it is the hell they're doing. My position is I'm not for sale, and the national security state can go bite its own ass. I'm not going to bite mine, because my view of it is that I recognize that these people don't have any legal authority. And I'm not interested in money. I'm not interested in their power. None of that impresses me. I'm totally unimpressed by power and money. And people who are very rich who come clucking up to me who think that I'm going to be genuflecting and kissing their feet, they got the biggest shock of their life coming. I'll tell you that right now. And same thing with these powerful, some of these intelligence and military people who thought that I'd be wowed by it. That doesn't impress me. Moral courage impresses me. Going the distance impresses me. Integrity impresses me. These values impress me a great deal. I don't care if you're, picking up someone's trash or you're the yard man or whatever. People who do wonderful things for other people, that impresses me. Having billions of dollars, not impressive. Having a lot of power that you've acquired through some kind of trick and chicanery, ruthlessness, doesn't impress me. But doing something wonderful for your fellow human beings, that's impressive. That's wonderful. So, when the head of Army Intelligence came up, I was just completely unimpressed, to say the least. A bit appalled at the figure that he was throwing around. I had no doubt he had access to it. And by the way, $2 billion in 1992 would be like, whatever, $5 billion today. But anyway, it was a lot of money, and I wasn't interested. But the problem is, and this is the problem, is that most politicians, businessmen, and I hate to say it, inventors who are approached by these kind of devils are going to sell out. And I think that we have to, the team we have are the people who aren't the sellouts. I don't know how else to say it. Because we're doing this because we know it's time for the world to move on to a new path where we can become a sustainable, peaceful civilization where in a generation with these technologies, poverty would vanish from the earth. People who are concerned about all the starvation in Africa and India and all the things going on, you are not going to fix it with throwing a few more $1 billion at it. You have to fundamentally change the way we're living on Earth so that people have the ability to irrigate, grow crops, have refrigeration, electrification, clean water with free energy. And then that's the big, huge game changer. But you know what? In the circles, in the intelligence communities, this kind of technology, they have a name for it, disruptive technologies. Mm-hmm. They call, I look at them as life-saving, earth-saving, transformative technologies. They call them disruptive. And it just shows you where their mindset is. They don't want to rock the boat. But you know what? The era of the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, they didn't want to rock the boat either with the Tesla stuff, and here we are 100 years later with the world in the state it's in, and they don't want to rock the boat now. At a certain point, you're just going to have to rock it, honey, and deal with it. It's like you're going to have to just deal with it, because otherwise we're headed towards a denouement that isn't going to be pretty. So we're going to have to just accept the fact that this is where we are, and it's time for a group of people to have the courage and the vision to make this change and not be intimidated by the power of the illegal state or the allure of a lot of money.
Right. I'd like to hop in here for a moment in terms of the Orion project again, to just add a couple points that people should be aware of. As a result of what we have learned over the last almost 3 years and nearly 20 years dealing with assorted inventors through the Disclosure Project and early CSETI work, et cetera, we've really come to the conclusion, as Dr. Greer mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, that we are no longer going to be funding individuals working in the garage with an idea that they think might work. We have found this to be a not very productive way of going ahead with the development because of some of the reasons we spoke about, having a team around them and having the background and the support necessary. So we're no longer, we did support some scientists along the way. We had some minor success and some failures, and so, but that's behind us, and we need to move on with our approach. So as Dr. Greer, to emphasize once again, we have two approaches. One is the inventor who comes to us with a device that's already functional. It's testable, as we mentioned earlier. It's self-starting, it's self-charging, it does not consume fossil fuels, produces significant power, not just a couple watts, but in the house, several thousand to 10 kilowatts, several thousand watts to 10 kilowatts perhaps in power, and is a robust demonstrator, as Dr. Bearden often describes, something that is solid, can run for weeks on end, etc. And an inventor is willing to work with us, allow us to test, allow us to reproduce under non-disclosure agreements to really understand the technology so we can decide how to go forward with the inventor on it. And the second approach, that's the it exists, and somebody's come up with it, and we will work with that person. The second approach that we've decided is needed is to build our own facilities, our own laboratory, bring some of those scientists in and work with us, and have the synergy and build the devices ourselves. So those are the two approaches that the Orion Project is now going to be using as we move on in the future. And hopefully some of you out there in the listening audience for the World Puja may know of somebody who has a device and that is willing to work with us. And I would ask people out there that know inventors to help us do some of the initial homework on it, if you will. If you know of somebody, contact them, find out if they're actually willing to work with somebody to help them bring things out and find out a bit more about it. We have many people who say, oh, have you heard of X, Y, or Z, some inventor that is already on their own track and has no interest in working with anybody. We've had that happen many, many times. We do chase after people, inventors, to see what they have, but it's if you could help with that, appreciate that very much. If not, let us know and have inventors contact us if they're at a stage where they have something that can be tested. That's all I wanted to say on that.
Yeah, and also there may be people listening who know folks of significant net worth who would want to support it financially, who could provide the all or part of the $5.7 million budget needed to do this properly and have the team put together. It's been wonderful that Drs. Bravo and Dr. Loder and myself and others have not needed, or at least we've been willing to do this work without any pay for our time and effort. But you cannot put together a dozen personnel and engineers where people have no income. People have families and obligations, and so the cold and stark reality is that you can only bootstrap things, sweat equity things up so far, and we've reached that point. Thanks to the people who've contributed to the Orion Project, we've gotten this far, and we have enough funds on hand to be able to reproduce or investigate any existing device. We do not have enough funds on hand, obviously, to build a facility or to run a facility and outfit it with the right equipment and hire, a dozen or so scientists and physicists and engineers and project management and get this thing going. So that's what we're searching for. But there may be someone listening who knows someone who has that ability or is part of an institution or a granting entity. And if they do, then please let us know. And actually at the website, you will see that there's a place to contact if you are such a person who can provide the funding, or if you're an inventor. Of course, we don't have anyone to answer everyone's, and I want to thank everyone for all the kind letters that they send in. We don't have an office or a staff, and so there's no way for us to reply to the thousands of things that come in. And also, we have had up until now an online donation capability. The problem with that is that it kept getting hacked into by people who were, I don't know, I think they were in Russia or Africa, who had stolen credit cards, and they were using the Orion Project merchant account to do $5 and $10 charges to see if the cards were good. And then we were having to then mop up that mess because they kept hacking in and hacking into that system. We then thought we had it fixed, and they continued to do it. And what's the problem with the system is that it means that each donation that's done online has to electronically be done by hand, which would be fine if we had an office and a secretary and a staff and IT people, but we don't. I mean, it's a handful of us who are doing everything. And so that part of the website, when you go there, you'll see it's been taken down. But I wanted to explain why it has been taken down. It's been taken down because we simply don't have any paid staff. We don't even have a part-time staff person to keep track of all that kind of stuff that's going on. It's a shame that the Internet and the electronic world, and it has become so, there's this tsunami of fraud going on out there. And I don't know why they keep targeting the Orion Project site to run these fraudulent things through, but it was basically shutting us down. So we have taken that part of the site off. You can still send a check in by snail mail, but again, there's no secretary at the other end to write you a nice letter back. So basically, I just wanted to explain that we do appreciate everyone's help. It's wonderful, and we look forward to it in the future, but we cannot do the online donation aspect anymore because we don't have anyone to monitor that literally, if someone does a $10 donation, which we appreciate, there has to be someone on our end, meaning Dr. Bravo or myself or my wife or someone who literally walks that through the system manually, because if we allow it to be automated, it gets hacked into by these criminals. And this has been going on now for over a year, and it's just we can't handle it. We don't have the time to handle that kind of nonsense. So unfortunately, whoever was trying to shut down the donation part of the website has succeeded simply because we don't have anyone to do that. And so it's going to have to be, the old-fashioned way, I'm afraid, at this point. But I do want to thank everyone who has made contributions, because it's enabled us to not only get the word out about the OrionProject.org, but investigate the technologies and come up with all these really amazing, a whole cache, for lack of a better word, of intelligence files and information and detailed specific plans that can be put into this facility once we have it constructed and staffed. And of course, we do still have, if somebody is an inventor who is out there, they can write to the site, and that will actually, that person's email and there's a technology evaluation form will be sent directly to our engineers, and they will be contacted by the engineers. If there's a major funder, someone who can fund the $5.7 million grant, there is a place for that, for people to write there, and I will contact them as well. But the smaller donations online, unfortunately, we had to change that system and take it down because of the hacking that was going on, and that's just the reality of the situation. I guess if we had some way, if we had an office and a staff working full-time or even part-time, we could handle it, but we don't have those, and so we're doing the best we can with what we got, and so this is the next best thing.
So the good news is, during this past several years here, we have done a lot of education of a lot of people about, which is one of the roles of the Orion Project, is to educate people on the reality and the potential of these technologies. And we've also gained a lot of scientists who are very interested in working with us. So it's been, from that point of view, it's been very successful.
Well, yes, I have to point out that we just recently in Washington hosted a meeting with several meetings. There was one a couple of months ago with people who were working with the White House on philanthropy and energy issues, and we had people from the Pew Charitable Trust. We had people from a number of walks of life come to meet one of these top secret scientists and have us present this information, and that's going now through the network. It's an educative process, and it's an iterative process, because a lot of people have never heard that you can actually get energy from the expansion of space-time around us and run a generator or get water to run as a fuel in your car. These are very new paradigms, and it is educational. The other thing that happened after that, quite recently, we had the former Minister of Defense of a G7 country come and meet with one of these top secret scientists, who, as well as a very prominent business family, an industrialist family, whose family came also to look at the proposal and hear about what we're doing, and now they're networking it through their system. So this is exactly what has to happen, and of course it takes a lot of time on our part. Dr. Loder's been doing this with me for years, and Dr. Bravo and myself, but we think it's very important because we have to develop the coalition, as it were, and the cooperative coalition of people who understand the science, even if they're non-science people, they can understand the basis of it, and to get behind this huge paradigm shift that has to happen, so that we don't just say that the only solution there can be is a windmill from the 1800s or something. The physics of this are very elegant, and are actually, once you get your mind around the trans-dimensional science, and that is that when you're using these high voltage frequencies, what you really are doing is that you're tapping into this huge trans-dimensional field of energy that supports the fabric of space-time, matter, all of it. And that's what you're tapping into. It's not like it's coming from nowhere. It's there all the time. It's like Tesla said, there's infinite energy all around us. And it's there for the taking, and there for learning how to tap into it. And that is a totally different paradigm from burning oil or having wind turn a windmill.
It certainly is.
It's a totally different mindset, and that is something. And so we're a lot of the efforts we're doing and continue to do as recently as a couple weeks ago. And as I'm doing this particular World Puget interview, I'm literally packing to go out to Sundance to meet with people to explain to a lot of the folks out there who are concerned about the environment and concerned about energy and the future of the world and poverty in Africa and social justice and things of this sort, exactly what it is we're doing with the Orion Project. So I'm actually en route very quickly to that. So these are the sort of things that we're doing and working all the time to fulfill, and it's I'd like to just thank everyone who has supported our work and to keep looking for us out there, sort of be our scouts, those of you on the World Puget Network who are listening, to be the scouts for folks who can be funding sources for this facility and research lab that we want to put together, and also for potential inventors that are out there, because people come across this phenomenon all the time. I mean, I'm not a physicist or an electrical engineer, but there are people who stumble across this all the time. I like telling the story of how Stan Meyer stumbled across his water-to-fuel system. He was actually working at a radar plant, and he observed that at certain high voltage and at certain frequencies, water just completely became a gaseous material very quickly and easily, of very, very low power, and it had to do with the high voltage and the resonant pulse frequency. So that empirical observation led him and his twin brother to begin to experiment and to develop what they did. And so these sort of things have been happening for 100 years. The tragic part of it is that they always end up getting taken down by a national security order or get taken out by some kind of business chicanery or financial chicanery. But what we're saying is that we, having learned from the past, and this is the one thing I say to inventors, if you don't learn from the past, you're going to repeat it, because the system is gamed very heavily to be sure that these systems don't get out to the public. And in fact, that is what has successfully been operational for 100 years. And we're trying to put both the strategic thinking and the leadership together to overcome those mistakes that have been made for the last 100 years, so that the public and the whole world knows that we can have free energy and a sustainable civilization. And a lot of people say, well, what in the world, what's the connection between the Orion Project and Disclosure Project? I said, look, there's anyone who ever studies what a UFO is, they're going to conclude that they're using free energy. You're not going to travel from the Andromeda Galaxy to here, 2.5 million light years, using solid rocket boosters and jet propulsion. You're just not. I'm sorry.
Exxon just didn't get there.
News flash to Exxon and news flash to the people who were burning things. You're dealing with a whole new physics. And so anyone who has studied the UFO subject and knows it's real and has seen the evidence for it knows that these devices are pulling energy out of the fabric of space-time and actually are trans-dimensional, that at a certain point, at a certain resonance, they look like they disappear and go into another dimension and then reappear at another point in space. Now, interestingly, I've interviewed people who back all the way in the 40s and 50s had been part of experiments in classified projects where they were able to do exactly that. And we have recently worked with a man who for years worked on transdimensional sciences and then got pulled into the intelligence community. Unfortunately, he wasn't allowed to go the distance with this because he was threatened, and a lot of problems came up, and that information's up on the website. But we know for a fact this has been done. So, the one thing I say to people is that the laws of the universe are universal. There's nothing that can be discovered in another star system that can't be discovered here on Earth, and hasn't been. We have discovered these things. And so the wonderful bit about this is that not only are we not alone in the universe, but the sciences that permit us to have a civilization without poverty, with a very green, minimal imprint on the planet by our civilization already exist. It isn't like they have to be discovered. They've been discovered. That's what the last 100 years did, the 20th century had. What has to now happen is that we have to have people come together and say, we're going to bring them out to the world, okay, and we're going to make it real, not just for people out at Pahoot Mesa in Nevada, or in Utah near the Dugway Proving Grounds, or in the outback of Australia at the underground base at Alice Springs. We're going to make it real for the housewife in Denver, and for the poor tribes that are in Africa, and for the villagers in India. So this is the big process that has to happen now, that has been forestalled and stopped by these ruthless interests who do not want to let go of their central control on the macroeconomic system. And it's not a trivial thing. We're talking about a relatively small number of corporations and individuals who have over half the world's net worth. It's something like 200 or 300 people, and corporations have over half of the net worth of the world, and who control the direction of the macroeconomic system. This is not democracy, and it's not justice, and it's not kind, and it's not enlightened. And so this is something that has to be transformed, and there has to be a group to do it. And we're offering to be that group to do everything we can, and we're very grateful to all the folks at the World Fusion Network for allowing us to speak to you every few weeks on this, and to the people who've helped the OrionProject.org get this far. And we're really at the point now we can do it. We just need to make it through this home stretch with the fundraising or identifying the scientists who have these technologies who are going to cooperate with this strategy. And it is a very unconventional strategy. It isn't your typical business strategy, because if you were just inventing another software program to run on your iPod, that's not a problem. You're not threatening Goldman Sachs, and you're not threatening the masters of the universe with that. These fundamental game-changing energy and propulsion technologies, they are viewed as disruptive. And so we have to just say that, well, it may be disruptive to your centralized control, and it may be that you don't want people to get uppity, because I think they really do view all of us as slaves on their plantation. I mean, I've said this. I mean, it's an ugly analogy, but I really think that the mindset of these folks is that they're the masters of the universe, and we're to stay in our place. Meanwhile, the Earth is being destroyed. So, it's time for us to stand up and say enough, and we're going to fix this problem, and we can, and that's what we're here to do. All right. Well, thank you, Ted, for
Well, you're sure welcome.
Today.
It's a pleasure being on the World Puja Network again.
Yeah, and you guys keep going to the OrionProject.org for updates as they come along. We'll send them out. If you want to sign up for updates, we don't have that many. We really basically will send you an update when we either get the funding or have a new device that we have identified and tested. But if you want to get in that database so that you're the first in the world to know, you can sign up for free there at the OrionProject.org. So with that, I'd like to again thank the World Puja Network for hosting us. This is Dr. Stephen Greer with Conversations with Dr. Greer. Bye-bye.